The sun had barely crested the horizon over Kuwait when Captain Emily Hawk Leland walked across the tarmac, helmet tucked under her arm. The air was thick with heat, even in the early morning, shimmering waves rising from the concrete like restless spirits. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, assigned to her that day, sat in its revetment like a sleeping beast, dull gray paint scarred from years of service. But something about this one was different. It was the tail number that caught the crew chief's eye. First, 810967. His brow furrowed as he ran a gloved hand along the metal, tracing the stenciled digits as if confirming they were real. "Ma'am," he said, his voice tight, "this is your ride today." Emily studied his expression. The man had the weathered look of someone who'd been turning wrenches longer than she'd been alive. But right now, he looked almost unsettled. "Problem?" she asked, setting her helmet down on the wing's leading edge. He hesitated, eyes flicking between her and the number. "Not exactly a problem, just, I thought this bird was retired years ago. You ever hear of the ghost hog?" Emily shook her head. "Nope, I fly them. I don't collect their ghost stories." The chief gave a dry chuckle, but didn't elaborate. "She'll bring you home, Captain. Always has." Then, more softly, almost to himself, "At least she used to." She brushed it off. There was no room in her cockpit for superstition. The briefing that morning had been brisk. Intelligence reports confirmed a pocket of enemy artillery entrenched just beyond a range of low desert ridges. Marines were pinned down, taking heavy shelling, and the convoy's escape route was being cut off by fresh mortar teams. Close air support was the only thing keeping them from being overrun. Emily's mission was to silence the guns fast. 2 F-16s would provide overwatch, sweeping for threats, and keeping enemy fighters out of the area. The A-10 was slow and tough, but in a region crawling with surface-to-air missiles, tough had limits. When the briefing officer asked for questions, Emily didn't speak. She was already visualizing the approach runs, the angles of attack, and the sound of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon spitting out 30mm rounds at 3,900 per minute. That sound had saved more soldiers than any prayer she knew. Outside, ground crews swarmed the A-10. Ammunition belts clinked as they fed them into the cannon's drum. Rockets were mounted under the wings. Every clank of a tool, every hiss of hydraulics seemed sharper today. Emily climbed the ladder, settling into the cockpit with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it hundreds of times, but still felt the faint thrill of strapping herself to a war machine. The seat hugged her, the harness locked tight. "Preflight complete," her crew chief called up, his voice carrying over the whine of the auxiliary power unit. "You've got full loadouts, Hurons, rockets, and Mavericks." Emily flipped. Switches, the cockpit coming alive with green displays and the low hum of electronics. She glanced once at the tail number in her mirrors, 810967. The digits lingered in her mind, like a song she didn't know the words to. "Tower, Hog 2-1 ready for taxi," she said into her headset. "Copy, Hog 2-1, cleared to runway." 09er. The A-10 rolled forward, heavy with ordnance. Heat haze danced on the horizon, the desert stretching endless in all directions. As she reached the threshold, the F-16 flight calcines Viper 1 and 2 pulled alongside on the parallel taxiway, their sleek frames a sharp contrast to the A-10's brutish bulk. "Morning, Hawk," Viper 1's voice came over the radio, smooth and confident. "You sure you don't want us to take the fun part?" Emily smirked. "Negative, Viper. You keep the flies off me. I'll swat the gnats." "Roger that. See you over the target." The tower cleared them for takeoff. One by one, the F-16S roared into the sky, afterburners leaving shimmering trails of heat. Emily eased the throttles forward, feeling the twin General Electric TF-34 engine spool. Up, behind her. The A-10's acceleration was nothing like the Viper's, but that wasn't its job. The Hog's job was to show up, take the punishment, and keep shooting until the mission was done. Wheels up, gear retracted, she banked west toward the coordinates. The desert below was a patchwork of pale sand and darker rock, the sun climbing higher, making everything sharp and unforgiving. Viper 1 to Hawk. Sam, activity's been heavier the past week, the F-16 lead warned. Keep your head on a swivel. Copy, Emily replied. She wasn't worried. She respected the threat, but she knew the Hog's strengths low. Slow, unpredictable turns that could throw off missile locks. And if one did hit, well, she'd seen Hogs come back with wings like Swiss cheese. Still, something about that crew chief's voice lingered in her head. The first sign of trouble came as a faint flicker on her radar warning receiver. An enemy search radar probing for targets. Emily adjusted course, dropping altitude until she skimmed just above the ridges, the A-10 hugging the earth like a predator stalking prey. She spotted the first mortar position camouflaged, but not enough to fool her trained eye. She lined up, toggled the trigger, and the GAU-8 roared to life, the whole aircraft shuddering as depleted uranium rounds tore into the target. Smoke. And dust bloomed below. Nice hit, Hawk, Viper 2 called. That's one less headache for the Marines. Emily pulled off the attack, banking toward the next ridge. 2 more artillery pits lit up her sensors. She grinned under her oxygen mask. This was what the Hog was built for, methodically dismantling the enemy's ability to fight. Her second pass silenced both positions. She was about to set up 4. A third when Viper 1's voice came sharp over the comms. Hawk, you're deep in the hot zone. We're getting multiple radar locks on you. Break off. Emily's eyes flicked to her our multiple warning tones now, the urgent kind. She should turn out, climb, get clear. But her targeting pod was already painting another gun emplacement, dangerously close to the Marine's position. 1 more pass, she said, voice calm. I'll be out in 30 seconds. Damn it, Hawk. She cut the radio chatter and rolled into her dive, lining up the pipper over the target. She never noticed the third, hidden radar source go active miles away, or the long white plume of a missile launching from its hidden nest. The missile launch warning blared through the cockpit, a shrill, insistent tone that drilled into Emily's skull. Her radar warning receiver lit up like a Christmas tree, the symbol for an inbound SAM flashing bright red. Missile, missile, missile. Viper 1's voice barked over the comms. Break right, now. Emily's instincts took over. She shoved the stick forward and rolled hard to starboard, flares spitting from the dispensers under her tail in a stream of burning magnesium. The A-10 groaned under the strain, its heavy wings flexing as the G-forces pressed her into the seat. But she wasn't climbing away. Not yet. The target in her HUD and entrenched mortar team was still active, still pounding the Marines pinned behind a shattered wall of sun-baked mud bricks. If they survived this mission, it would be because she'd put those guns out of action. Stay with me, baby, she muttered to the ghost hog, nudging the nose back toward the attack vector. The missile seeker was fooled for a heartbeat by the flares, but the operator on the ground adjusted, and the lock returned. The tone in her headset became faster, more urgent. Damn it, Hawk, you don't have time for this. Viper 2 shouted. Emily ignored him. She centered the pipper. Over the target, thunged the master arm switch, and squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon erupted with its signature growl, the entire A-10 shuddering as depleted uranium shells poured from the spinning barrel. The rounds tore into the mortar pit, exploding in plumes of sand, smoke, and shredded equipment. Men scattered too late. The gun went silent in a cloud of dust. She pulled up hard, the missile warning screaming like a banshee in her ears. This time, she didn't have the angle to avoid. Fox 3, Fox 3. Viper 1's voice cut in, his F-16 releasing a missile toward the SAM site in an attempt to neutralize it. But Emily knew his shot would land seconds too late. The missile slammed into her left wing with a bone-shaking hump. Metal tore away in a fiery spray. The cockpit jolted violently, her head snapping forward before the hardest caught her. Warning lights flared, hydraulic pressure dropping, fuel leaking, electrical systems flickering. "Hawk's hit!" Viper 2's voice was a razor edge of panic. "Repeat, Hawk is hit." "I'm still flying," she replied, her tone steady, almost unnervingly calm. Years in the cockpit had drilled this into her. Panic was the enemy. The A-10 was built for punishment. She could lose half a wing and still keep flying sometimes. She leveled out, checking her instruments. The left aileron was gone, a jagged stump smoking in the slipstream. One of her fuel tanks was bleeding kerosene in a shimmering trail. But the engines, God bless them, still roared. "You're leaking bad, Hawk," Viper 1 warned. "You need to eject. No, negative. I'm bringing her back." There was a pause on the radio, the kind of silence that said her wingmen didn't believe she could make it, but weren't going to argue with her in the middle of a fight. Emily scanned the skies. The F-16s were sweeping for more threats, their contrails slicing through the deep blue above. Below, the desert stretched in endless waves of heat and sand. Then she saw them, another cluster of artillery trucks, half camouflaged, behind a ridge, directly in the path of the retreating Marines. Her voice was low, almost to herself. Not done yet. She banked the A-10, the damaged wing protesting with every movement. "Hawk, you are not going back in," Viper 1 snapped. "I'm already in," she replied, lining up her Mavericks. The targeting reticle danced across the dusty ridge until it locked onto the first truck. She fired. The missile streaked away, curving down into the target with a brilliant explosion. The second truck tried to flee too slow. Another Maverick struck home, flipping it into a burning heap of steel and shrapnel. "Target's down," Emily said, breathing hard. "You're insane," Viper 2 muttered. "Maybe," she answered. "But they're alive because of it." The Marines' convoy began moving again, black smoke curling behind them as they sped toward safety. Emily finally turned toward home. The Ghost Hog felt heavier now, every vibration magnified through. The controls. The hydraulic warning lights glared at her, and the stick felt sluggish, like trying to steer through wet cement. "Vipers, I'm limping back," she said. "Keep me covered." "Copy that." "We've got you." They climbed together, the two F-16s flanking her like hawks, guarding a wounded bird. Over the comms, Viper 1's tone softened. "Hawk, that's some of the best flying I've ever seen. But you're not out of the woods, yet there's chatter about another SAM nest along your route." Emily swallowed, eyes sweeping the barren terrain ahead. She could almost feel the crosshairs of an unseen enemy radar searching for her. The Ghost Hog's engines hummed steadily, but the left one coughed once, a reminder that her luck was running thin. She reached forward, patting the console like she might a horse that had carried her through a fight. "Just get me home," she whispered. But in her gut, she knew home was still a very long way away. The desert below shimmered under the relentless sun, every ridge and dune blurring in the heat haze. The Ghost Hog's cockpit felt like an oven now, the air thick with the faint scent of scorched metal and leaking fuel. Emily's eyes flicked between the terrain ahead and the blinking warnings screaming for her attention. She knew she'd taken a hard hit, maybe harder than she'd admitted over the radio. The left aileron was gone. The wing's leading edge was shredded and hydraulic. Pressure was bleeding away like air from a punctured lung. The controls felt heavier every minute, each turn an argument she had to win with the Hog. Hawk? Status? Viper One's voice was sharp in her headset. Functional, but degraded, she replied. Left side's chewed up bad. I've got power, but limited maneuverability. A pause. Copy. We'll keep scanning ahead. Intel says the route home might be clean, but the radar warning receiver cut him off with its urgent, rising whine. The kind of tone every pilot hated. Emily's gaze snapped to the display another missile lock. Her blood went cold. Lock on! New source. 2 o'clock low, Viper 2 shouted. They've been sitting dark waiting for you. From behind a low dune ridge, a telltale plume of white smoke erupted a second sail, its trail curling into the sky like a spear tipped with fire. Emily's hands moved before she thought. Stick forward, banking hard right, flares popping in a shimmering chain. The missile arced toward the flares, then curved back toward her. This one wasn't fooled. The Hog shuddered as she dove for the deck, hugging the desert floor so close she could almost see her shadow rippling over the sand. The gi forces pressed her into the seat, every muscle in her arms burning as she fought the unresponsive controls. Come on, she hissed. The missile was closing fast. Emily yanked the throttle, then chopped power, a desperate maneuver, to bleed speed and throw off the missile's timing. She kicked the rudder hard, sliding the A-10 into a skid turn only its sturdy frame could survive. The missile streaked past, missing by what felt like inches, but its proximity fuse triggered. The detonation slammed into the Hog like a sledgehammer, shrapnel rattling off the fuselage with a metallic scream. Alarms exploded in her ears. The left engine's gauges dipped, then steadied, coughing black smoke into the sky. Hydraulic pressure dropped again, dangerously low now. God, Hawk, you okay? Viper One's voice was tight. I'm still flying, she said through gritted teeth. She didn't add for now. Her instruments told a grim story. The left wing's damage was worse, nearly catastrophic. Her left side hydraulics were almost gone, forcing her to rely on backup mechanical linkages that felt like trying to steer. A dump truck through wet sand. Ejection was technically still an option, but barely. And ejecting over this terrain meant capture or worse before rescue could arrive. I'm bringing her home, she said flatly. Copy, Viper One replied, no argument this time. But in his voice, she could hear it, the disbelief that she'd actually make it. Emily's breathing slowed. She forced her mind into the calm, razor-focused state she'd cultivated over years of training and combat. Ignore the heat. Ignore the burning smell from the left wing. Ignore the fact that her seat vibrated now with a strange, uneven rhythm. Checklists ran through her mind. Fuel critical, but manageable if she kept throttle conservative. Electrical still. Online, though several secondary systems were dead. Weapons spent except for the GAU-8, not that she planned to use it again. She leveled off just above the desert floor, the F-16S flying escort in a tight protective pattern. From up here, she could see the convoy of Marines kicking up dust trails in the distance, retreating to safety. That, at least, was done. She was about to radio her updated ETA to base when she saw another artillery position hidden near a cluster of rocks, a spot her earlier passes hadn't touched. And it was dangerously close to the Marines' route. Emily's jaw tightened. She could pass the coordinates to the Vipers, let them take the shot. That would be the smart move. But she also knew the Vipers were low on munitions after suppressing the SAM sites, and their bombs weren't as precise at low level without a full targeting run. Her eyes went to the GAU-8's ammo counter, still a small reserve left. No, she muttered to herself. What's that, Hawk? Viper 2 asked. I'm making one last pass, she said. Hawk, no. You've got structural damage. And those Marines have about 5 minutes before that gun has them in range. I'm not letting it happen." Without waiting for their reply, she banked toward the target. The hog groaned under the stress, the damaged wing dragging against the air like a wounded limb. She lined up the shot, pipper-centered, and squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared. The sound was physical. It vibrated through the cockpit, through her bones, through the very air. The shells tore into the artillery emplacement, shattering the weapon in a storm of fire and dirt. The hog was so close to the ground now that sand kicked up in her wake. She pulled up slowly, painfully clearing the ridge with mere yards to spare. Cheers erupted over the radio from the Vipers. "Target destroyed." "Marines are clear," Emily reported, voice calm again. But the victory was short-lived. A sudden bang reverberated through the fuselage, something in the damaged wing giving way. The aircraft lurched violently to the left, and Emily fought the stick with every ounce of strength she had left. "Hawk, you're bleeding altitude." Viper One's voice was urgent. "You've got to set it down now." She scanned the horizon. The base was still too far, but a stretch of flat desert lay ahead, an old emergency landing strip from a long-abandoned airfield. "That's my spot," she said. "We'll mark the approach," Viper 2 replied, his F-16 banking, "to sweep the area for threats." Emily adjusted her glide path, every movement of the stick feeling heavier than the last. The ghost hog was dying under her. She could feel it, but it wasn't dead yet. She didn't notice that her right glove was damp with sweat, or that her shoulders ached from the constant pull. She didn't notice the heat baking through her flight suit. What she noticed was the way the hog still responded slowly, stubbornly, but with that same grit she'd heard about in other pilots' stories. It was almost as if the plane refused to go down without her. And for the first time all day, Emily allowed herself to think about the crew chief's words that morning. "She'll bring you home. Always has." The moment Captain Sarah Mitchell pulled herself into the rocky alcove, she felt her lungs heave like they were going to tear. Smoke rose from the valley floor in black, twisting pillars. The smell of burning jet fuel and scorched earth clung to the air, mixing with the acrid stench of gunpowder. Her knees ached from the impact of ejecting, but she didn't have time to think about pain. She was alive for now, and that was enough. Far below, the wreckage of her A-10 Thunderbolt still burned, its metal skin melting into glowing puddles. She could hear the enemy. Shouts, distant but echoing, rose through the mountain passes. They had seen the chute. They knew where she was. She crouched lower, pulling her survival radio from her vest. Her training told her to stay still, find concealment, and make contact with friendly forces. But training also never truly captured the suffocating weight of being alone in enemy territory with the knowledge that the hunters were getting closer every minute. She pressed the transmit button. "Mayday, Mayday, Hammer 2-1, aircraft down. Grid," she paused to read her GPS. 489 by 264. Request immediate extraction. Her voice was steady, but her heart was pounding hard enough to feel in her temples. Static crackled back. Then a voice calm, but edged with urgency, came through. "Hammer 2-1, this is Viper 1. Copy your position. Hold tight, we're en route. ETA 8 mics." Sarah almost smiled. Viper 1 was an F-16 call sign. That meant someone was already in the air, heading her way. But then she heard another sound, low, grinding, and growing louder. A diesel engine. She crawled to the edge of the alcove and peered through the scrub. 2 trucks, their beds lined with men carrying rifles, were winding up the narrow road toward her crash site. They moved like they knew exactly where to look. She slid back, keeping low. Her survival knife was in her hand without her realizing it. She thought of her father, who used to tell her during hunting trips, "The moment you think you're safe is the moment the woods remind you you're not." Minutes passed like hours. Overhead, the sound of jet engines roared faintly, growing stronger. She could see faint contrails arcing toward her location. The F-16s were close, but the trucks were closer. Then explosions. Precision bursts slammed into the valley road, throwing dirt and shrapnel into the air. The enemy trucks skidded sideways, one bursting into flames. The second reversed violently, tires screeching. Sarah ducked as the mountains shook from the knee. Force of the bombs. Her radio hissed again. "Hammer 2-1, Viper 1. We've got your location locked. Sit tight, we'll keep the path clear." For a moment, relief washed over her. But it vanished instantly when she heard the unmistakable crack of rifle fire much closer on the ridge above her. Sarah rolled into a narrow crevice as bullets sparked off the rock near her head. Her mind sharpened. Whoever was up there wasn't firing blindly. They were tracking her. She pressed herself flat against the stone, heart hammering. Her hand brushed the emergency flare in her vest. It was her last resort. If she used it, it would signal friendlies, but also give away her exact position to anyone watching. She hesitated. Then she remembered what the instructors drilled into her at survival school. The right decision is rarely the one that feels safe. She yanked the cap, fired the flare high into the sky. A brilliant red streak cut through the smoke-filled air. Seconds later, the ridge above her erupted in a storm of 20mm cannon fire from the circling F-16s. The ground shook. Rocks and dust cascaded down the slope. She didn't know if the gunners above were dead or scattered, but the firing stopped. Sarah pressed her radio again. "Viper 1, Hammer 2-1. Hostiles on ridge neutralized?" "Affirmative," the pilot replied. Then his voice lowered. "Ma'am, you're going to want to be ready. We've got inbound friendlies, but you've also got company moving in from the north." She scanned the tree line, their shadows moving between the trunks, deliberate and fast. Her hand went to her sidearm. She had 15 rounds. The sound of rotors thundered in the distance. Rescue. But the enemy had spotted the flare too. The race was on. The distant hump of rotor blades was growing louder, but Sarah knew it wasn't over yet. The rescue bird, an HHD Pave Hawk, was still minutes out, and in this kind of terrain, minutes could feel like a lifetime. The shadows she had spotted in the trees were closer now. She could make out flashes of cloth, the glint of metal. They were disciplined, moving in a staggered pattern, keeping low, rifles ready. This wasn't a random search party. These were trained fighters. Sarah gritted her teeth and shifted to a position where she could see the approach without exposing herself too much. Her sidearm felt absurdly small in her hands. Still, she'd make every round count if she had to. Overhead, the F-16s made another pass, their engines tearing the sky apart. One of them dipped lower, almost skimming the treetops. The radio crackled. "Hammer 2-1, Viper 1. I can see them. We're going to cut them off." The F-16 peeled away, and moments later, a cluster of bombs detonated in a nearby clearing. The concussion rolled through the rocks, shaking dust into Sarah's eyes. But she kept them open. She had to watch. The fighters in the trees didn't scatter. They shifted, adapting, flanking, using the chaos as cover. These weren't just locals with rifles. They knew air tactics, knew how to move under fire. Sarah's mind raced. Who were these guys? Then, one of them broke into the open. Just enough for her to see the patch on his sleeve. Her stomach dropped. A black falcon over crossed blades. She knew that insignia. It wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this theater. Not anywhere near the United States declared areas of operation. Her radio popped again. Viper 1-2. Hammer 2-1. Confirm tail number of your A-10. Sarah frowned. Say again? Your tail number. We need confirmation. She hesitated. 714. Silence. Long enough for her to think the transmission had cut. Then the pilot's voice returned, tight and low. Copy. Stand by. There was no time to wonder why they cared. The fighters were less than 100 yards away now, darting between boulders, firing short bursts that ricocheted off the stone near her head. She returned fire, 2 quick shots, one hitting rock just inches from a man's arm. The F-16s roared overhead again, but this time they didn't drop ordnance. Instead, they banked into a protective circle, staying close. It was a combat air patrol covering her position while the Pave Hawk approached. The rotor noise was a deep, throbbing presence now, cutting through the air. Sarah caught sight of the helicopter skimming low over the ridgeline, its miniguns already spinning. The gunners opened fire, sending streams of tracers into the tree line. The enemy fighters finally broke, some diving for cover, others retreating the way they came. Move, move, move. A voice boomed from the Pave Hawk's loudspeaker. Sarah burst from the alcove, sprinting downhill toward the landing zone. Her legs screamed from the impact of the ejection earlier, but adrenaline drowned out the pain. The ground erupted just to her left. Someone was still shooting. She hit the dirt, rolled, and kept going, bullets snapping overhead. The Pave Hawk flared, its skids just touching the uneven ground. 2 parascumen leapt out, one covering with his rifle, the other running toward her. He grabbed her vest and practically hauled her the last 20 feet. They dove into the helicopter together. The PJ slapped the side twice. We've got her. The bird lifted off, climbing hard. Sarah felt the vibration through her bones, the rush of air through the open side door. She dared a glance out. The wreckage of her A-10 was just a smear of twisted metal now, the smoke curling into the sky like a black ribbon. But something caught her eye. On the fuselage barely visible through the fire tail number was still intact. 714. One of the F-16 pilot's voices came over the rescue frequency. Hammer 2-1, this is Viper 1. Just so you know, my father flew that bird in '03. He told me if I ever saw it in trouble, I'd better bring whoever was in the seat home. No matter what, Sarah blinked. Your father? Yeah, Major Kyle Landry. He said the last pilot before you was the reason he made it back from Iraq alive. Guess fate had plans. She sat back, the roar of the rotors filling her ears. She thought about that for a long moment. The A-10 she had been flying wasn't just a machine. It was a survivor. And now, so was she. The Pave Hawk banked toward friendly territory, the F-16s still circling above like silent sentinels. The first thing Major Ton Steele Henson noticed wasn't the voice, it was the silence. In a war zone, silence meant trouble. Usually, the airwaves were alive with clipped, urgent chatter, headings, altitudes, missile warnings. But now, nothing. The F-16s on cap had gone dead quiet. Steele banked hard over the ridgeline, trying to visually acquire the downed A-10's crash site. Below, smoke rose in a lazy column from somewhere deep in the valley. The smell of burning fuel and scorched earth carried even at his altitude, mixed with something sharper cordite. Falcon 2, you copy? Steele tried again, voice tight. A pause. Then, almost reluctantly, Steele, it's her. Steele's brows knitted. Her who? Check the tail number. You're not gonna believe it. That's when Steele saw it half buried in a mangled wing, the paint blistered and peeling, but still visible. A F-780671. For a moment, his training failed him. His mind went back to an old photograph from the 355th Fighter Wing archives, an A-10 with that exact number, flown by Captain Elizabeth Rook Kane during the First Gulf War. The story had circulated among pilots for years. Half legend, half classified truth. Rook had flown deep behind enemy lines in '91 to save a pinned-down Marine recon team, surviving triple F fire, 2 missile locks, and catastrophic engine damage. She'd limped the Hog back on one engine, gear jammed. Hydraulics shot and landed it without ejecting. She was a hero, and she'd been dead for over 20 years. Steele blinked. His brain couldn't reconcile what his eyes were telling him. That airframe had been retired, scrapped, written off as a museum piece. Yet here it was in a live combat zone. Falcon 1, what's her status? Steele asked, scanning for parachute canopies. No answer. Falcon 1, say again. Finally, a voice came back, low and almost reverent. We found the chute. She's moving. But Steele, it's Rook. It's really her. His blood ran cold. This wasn't possible. The Air Force didn't bring back dead pilots, and they didn't resurrect 40-year-old airframes for Black Ops, at least, not officially. But if there was one thing Steele knew, it was that someone had pulled strings to get this mission into the air, and they'd done it in total silence. Copy, Steele said finally, his tone clipped. I'm inbound to cover. Hold position. He pushed his F-16 to the edge of its performance envelope, sweeping low over the valley. The terrain flashed beneath in ravines, mud brick villages, fields scorched from recent fighting. He saw Falcon 1's jet orbiting tight overhead, then a figure in a tattered flight suit, helmet still on, waving weakly near the tree line. Steele's gut clenched. The figure moved with a limp, but there was a sharpness to her posture, the kind of awareness only combat pilots carried, the constant scanning, the instinctive crouch at the sound of distant gunfire. He keyed the mic. Rook, this is Steele. Do you copy? Static. Then a faint, almost incredulous voice. Didn't think I'd hear that call sign again? Steele swallowed hard. You're supposed to be dead. Yeah, she said flatly. Supposed to be. Before Steele could respond, a burst of tracer fire erupted from the ridge to the west. His targeting radar lit up with 3 separate locks, manpads, maybe vehicle-mounted. They'd been tracking the downed pilot, waiting for the rescue. Falcon 1, break right. Suppressing, Steele barked, rolling inverted and diving. The G's slammed into his chest as he lined up a strafing. Run. His 20mm Vulcan cannon roared, stitching the ridge with fire. Explosions bloomed, dirt and rock geysering into the air. Rook, stay put, he shouted, pulling hard into a climb. Rescue bird is 5 mics out. Negative, her voice cut in sharp. They'll never make it in time. Hostiles closing fast. I've got a better idea. Steele's head snapped around, searching for her. That's when he saw movement near the wrecked Hog. Rook was dragging something from the debris. A pod? No, not a pod, a weapon system. You've got to be kidding me, Steele muttered. Old bird still got teeth, Rook said, and he could hear the grin in her voice. With movements far too practiced for someone who'd just been shot down, she connected the system to a still intact hardpoint. Sparks flew as she bypassed burned wiring, her hands moving like she'd done it 100 times. Steele's HUD lit up his F-16 sensors, had just registered a Maverick missile lock. From the downed A-10, Falcon 1, it clear. Rook. Ordered, I'm taking the shot. Steele barely had time to peel away before a blinding flash split the air. The missile streaked toward the enemy position on the ridge. A heartbeat later, the impact turned half the hillside into a rolling cloud of dust and fire. When the smoke cleared, Steele saw her helmet visor down, standing in front of the shattered Hog like it was a loyal dog guarding her. You still with me, Steele? She asked. Yeah, he breathed. But I have about 100 questions. You'll get your answers, she said, glancing skyward at the incoming rescue chopper. If we live through the next 10 minutes. Steele's radar pinged again, more targets inbound, fast movers this time. Whoever had taken her down wanted to make sure she didn't get back. And for the first time since the start of the mission, Steele felt something other than confusion. He felt the hair-raising certainty that the fight they just stumbled into was bigger than the war they thought they were fighting. The desert night was still as velvet when Captain Elena Valkyrie Vega entered the airspace over the border. She knew every star above her. Some pilots used GPS alone, but she trusted the sky like an old friend. The F-16 formation she flew with tonight wasn't here for training. They were hunting. And every one of them carried the quiet, simmering rage from the last mission, when Hurry 10 had been shot down. Only none of them spoke about it. The mission briefing had been crystal clear: intercept a rogue convoy suspected of smuggling surface-to-air missiles. Intel showed they were moving under cover of darkness, likely with spotters and decoys. But the pilots weren't just after a convoy. They were after answers. And those answers were tangled with one thing they still didn't understand: why Elena's A-10 had been marked with the tail number 820923, a number officially retired decades ago, after another pilot, a legend, had vanished in combat. Every pilot in the Air Force knew that number like it was folklore. It belonged to Major Rebecca Hollister, a woman whose name was whispered in ready rooms like a ghost story. She had been declared Mia after a rescue mission went wrong, and her warthog had never been found. So when the F-16s had seen Elena's wreckage during the last mission, and that number was staring back at them through the fire and smoke, they'd gone silent. No jokes, no chatter. Just a heavy, unnatural quiet in the comms. Tonight, that silence felt even heavier. The lead pilot, Ranger, gave the first order. Formation, tighten up. We've got movement at grid, Echo Delta. 14. Through her canopy, Elena spotted it, a faint glimmer, headlights flickering as the convoy wove through the narrow canyon roads. They were using the terrain for cover, but to a pilot like Elena, it was like watching prey try to hide in a field with nowhere to run. She clicked her comm. Valkyrie to Ranger, permission to go low? A pause. Then, negative. You stay. In Overwatch. You're too valuable right now. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Like they weren't just protecting her because she was part of the mission, but because she was connected to something much older, something they didn't fully understand. The convoy made a sudden stop. Figures spilled out, scrambling to set up what looked like a tripod. Elena's gut went cold. Sam launcher. She didn't wait for orders. Ranger, break left. They're about to. The missiles streaked upward, a flash of white smoke against the night. Ranger's F-16 rolled. Hard, the missile missing by feet. But that wasn't the end. 2 more launchers appeared, both swiveling toward the formation. Elena dropped her nose, engines screaming. She wasn't supposed to get low, but orders were fragile things when lives were on the line. Her targeting pod locked in. One trigger pull, and a ripple of fire cut through the night, a SAM position erupting in a bloom of orange. She didn't stop. Another volley took out the second launcher, but the third. The third stayed locked on her. The missile came fast, almost too fast. Her RWR screamed in her headset, the pitch rising in warning. She dumped flares, banked hard, but it wasn't enough. Impact shook the airframe, alarms blaring. Smoke filled the cockpit. Her comm crackled. Ranger's voice, raw. Valkyrie, say status. She coughed, fighting the spinning horizon. Still here, losing hydraulics? The A-10 was a tank in the sky, built to survive, but this wasn't going to be a graceful landing. She managed to pull level long enough to guide the crippled jet toward the canyon edge. The ground was coming fast. Then she saw it painted on the fuselage beside her canopy, in faint, battle-worn stencil, 820923. Her breath caught. She had seen it before, but in this moment, it was like the number was. Hers, like it had always been hers. Somewhere in the static, another voice broke through. Not Ranger, not anyone on this mission. A woman's voice, calm and steady, with the faintest echo. Stay with it, Valkyrie? You're not done yet. The shock almost made her forget to pull up, but she did just enough to clear the ridge, skimming the treetops before setting down in a brutal, grinding crash that sent dirt and sparks flying. The world went quiet, except for the ticking of cooling metal. Back in the air, the F-16s had gone dead silent again. None of them were looking at the burning wreckage. They were staring at their radar screens. Because for a split second, just before Elena hit the ground, their systems had registered two A-10s in the same position. One transmitting Elena's code, and one transmitting the call sign Hollister 923. And then, nothing. Ranger's voice came back, strained. Valkyrie, sit tight. We're coming for you. Elena unstrapped, stumbling out into the cool desert night. She could still hear that voice in her headset, even though the radio was dead. Finish the mission, Velya. Then you'll understand. Her hands were trembling not from fear, but from the sense that she was now caught in something far larger than herself. And somewhere above, in the cold, dark sky, the ghost of 820923 was still, flying. The desert dawn broke slowly, painting the vast, cracked earth with streaks of pink and gold. Captain Elena Valkyrie Vega leaned against a jagged rock, every muscle aching, her breath coming in ragged bursts. The cool morning air cut sharply through the sweat clinging to her flight suit, but she barely noticed. Behind her, the twisted remains of the A-10 Thunderbolt II smoldered, a blackened skeleton carved into the Earth's surface. The heat from the metal still radiated faintly, mixing with the desert's dry scent. The fuselage bore the faint stencil of a number she had come to understand was more than just identification. 820923. Elena traced the faded digits with a dirt-smudged finger, her mind racing through everything she'd learned since that fiery crash nearly claimed her life. The radio was dead, but the silence that had gripped the airwaves after she went down was louder than any transmission she'd ever heard. The F-16 pilots, her wingmen and protectors, had fallen silent the moment they saw that tail number on her A-10. Their usual crisp chatter stopped, replaced by a heavy, almost reverential quiet. That silence was no accident. It was respect, fear, awe. She was not the first pilot to carry that number, and she knew now she wouldn't be the last. In the days that followed, classified briefings unfolded in darkened rooms behind reinforced doors. The story of Major Rebecca Hollister, the original bearer of 820923, emerged from whispers and archived files. Hollister was a legend, a ghost in the sky who had vanished under mysterious circumstances decades ago while carrying out clandestine operations. Her missions had never been acknowledged publicly, flights over denied territories, surgical strikes against hidden enemies, missions so sensitive that they vanished from official histories. When Hollister disappeared, the Air Force didn't retire her tail number. Instead, it became a mantle passed down from pilot to pilot, each chosen for their unyielding courage and skill. A symbol that tied generations of warriors in a chain of silent duty. Elena realized that her crash and the entire mission were part of a hidden war, a war fought in shadows, where heroes flew under ghosts' banners, where sacrifice was the currency and legends were reborn in each new cockpit. As the sun climbed higher, the first rescue teams arrived, breaking the desert's silence with their rumbling engines and shouted commands. Elena stood, the ache in her body a dull throb, beneath the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The rescue helicopter touched down nearby, its rotors stirring the dust and heat. The F-16 formation, which had guarded her descent and guarded the skies, reformed overhead, their pilots finally breaking their silence to coordinate the extraction. Yet, beneath the relief of being saved, Elena carried a heavier burden. She looked up into the vast blue sky, where her A-10 had soared, where it had fought tooth and claw to protect the Marines below. That battered plane had survived the impossible enemy missiles, artillery fire, near catastrophic damage, and still, it brought her home. It was a machine built not just of metal and circuits, but of legacy and heart. In the quiet moments between missions, Elena found herself haunted by the voice she'd heard in the cockpit during her final descent. Calm, steady, familiar, almost like a guardian's whisper. "Finish the mission, Vega. Then you'll understand." That voice belonged to the ghost of 820923, to the spirit of those who had flown before her, to the legacy she was now sworn to uphold. The following weeks brought more briefings and cryptic orders. She learned that those Black Falcon fighters who had hunted her down weren't random insurgents. They were part of a covert paramilitary force tied to a secret faction opposed to the Shadows' war she was fighting. Her missions would continue, but now with a new awareness. Every flight carried the weight of the past and the hope for the future. She wasn't just flying for herself or her squadron. She was flying for a lineage of ghosts. As Elena prepared for her next sortie, she inspected her new aircraft. The familiar shape of the A-10 greeted her like an old friend. Painted on the fuselage in bold, weathered stencil was the number 820923, a badge of honor, a reminder of duty beyond the visible battlefield. Her fellow pilots greeted her with a mixture of awe and quiet respect. The silence in the coms had given way to nods, knowing glances, the unspoken acknowledgement that when the ghost flew again, everything changed. Back in the cockpit, Elena settled into her seat, fingers running over the worn controls. She whispered a silent vow not just to survive, but to honor those who came before her. Because legends don't simply fade away. They fly again. They fight again. They protect what matters, sometimes from enemies seen, sometimes from shadows unseen. And sometimes, when the radio falls silent and the F-16 pilots hold their breath, it's because they know the ghost is in the sky once more.